The howl tore through the night like an axe splitting a shield. Every face in the communal hall froze. Astrid, Thor's daughter, the widow who had warned for months about the giant wolf, now clutched the Fenrir amulet against her chest as silent tears traced down her pale face. "He has come," she whispered, "just as I promised he would. Thank you for joining this story. This channel is just beginning its journey, and every subscription means the world, helping us grow and reach that first 1,000 subscribers. If you find yourself drawn to these tales of Viking life, struggle, and the unseen forces that shaped their world, please consider subscribing. And if you do, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. The morning air hung heavy and damp over Ravnfjord, the mist rolling off the dark waters like slow ghosts drifting across a sleeping world. A dense fog clung to the edges of the fjord, muffling the cries of the seabirds and the creak of wooden boats tied loosely to weathered docks. The chill in the air bit sharply at exposed skin, a harsh reminder that winter was creeping closer, even as the sun struggled to pierce the thick gray overcast. In a small cabin perched on the edge of the settlement, separated from the cluster of other homes by a narrow stretch of rocky shore and sparse pine trees, Astrid, Thor's daughter, awoke before dawn. Her breath came in quiet clouds as she adjusted beneath the rough-spun woolen blanket that barely kept the cold at bay. Her eyes, sharp and somber beneath heavy lids, flickered open to the faint glow seeping through the unadorned window. The room was small, humble, a wooden frame lined with furs and simple woven textiles, a single bed, a low table scattered with carved runes and scraps of cloth, a small hearth, cold now, but ready to be stirred to life. Astrid lay still for a long moment, attentive to the silence pressing in around her. The years of solitude since Leif vanished had taught her the language of waiting, the hush of the wind outside, the soft creaking of timber settling, the distant call of the fjord's restless waters. Her fingers instinctively reached for the pendant resting on a leather thong beside her pillow, a small carving of Fenrir, the monstrous wolf of old, etched deep into dark oak. The amulet was heavier now, not just in weight but in meaning. It was a talisman against the dread that haunted her dreams and waking moments alike. She rose slowly, the cold seeping into her bones as she swung her feet to the floor. The rough wood was uneven beneath her bare soles, worn smooth only where she walked most often. Moving quietly so as not to disturb the sleeping house, she made her way to the hearth. She gathered kindling and dry twigs, striking flint against stone until a small flame flickered to life, growing into a steady blaze that filled the cramped room with warmth and flickering shadows. Her breath caught for a moment as her eyes settled on a small, polished piece of metal resting on the shelf, the mirror Leif had given her on their wedding day. It was a rare luxury, a gift from a distant trader who had come through the fjord years before. The surface gleamed faintly in the firelight, an old, tarnished silver that caught the flames and fractured them into dancing shards. Astrid reached out, brushing her fingers over the cool surface, feeling the weight of memory settle over her like a shroud. The past year had been a relentless storm of grief and unease. Since Leif's disappearance on that ill-fated expedition east, she had been left to navigate the fragile currents of life alone. No body had been recovered, no final rites performed, and so the community cast a wary eye toward her. Some pitied her silence, others whispered dismissed doubts. Was she mad, or somehow cursed? The village was a tight-knit web of survival, and her solitude was a thorn in their collective flesh. Yet Astrid clung to her visions. For 3 moons she had been tormented by dreams of a monstrous wolf stalking the mountains, its eyes glowing with a terrible hunger. The creature was no mere beast. It embodied the wrath of the gods, an omen of destruction foretold in ancient stories whispered around hearth fires. She had tried to warn the people, to make them see, but her words fell like stones into a frozen lake, ignored, dismissed, or met with scorn. Now, as the fire crackled and the first light of dawn crept through the smoke-darkened window, she prepared herself for another day of watchful waiting. She dressed carefully, pulling on a simple woolen dress dyed deep blue, the edges frayed from wear. Over it, she wrapped a heavy cloak lined with fox fur, its weight comforting, a shield against the cold and the loneliness. Her black hair, thick and with the faintest sheen of oil, was braided tightly, a habit from a time when her hands wove sails for the draker, her fingers steady and sure. But the steady hands of the weaver had grown restless. Now they trembled slightly, betraying the storm that churned beneath her calm surface. Stepping outside, the cold air hit her face like a slap, sharp and real. The village was still quiet, save for the occasional murmur of early risers preparing nets or stoking fires. The smell of damp earth mingled with smoke and salt, and somewhere, faintly, the distant clang of a blacksmith hammering metal echoed through the valley. Astrid's gaze drifted upward, where the mountains loomed, shrouded in heavy clouds. The peaks were jagged and foreboding, their dark silhouettes etched against the pale sky. She could almost feel the presence there, the weight of the mountain's silence, broken only by the occasional cry of raven wings cutting through the cold air. Her footsteps carried her toward the center of the village, a slow, deliberate pace as she passed familiar faces. Some nodded politely, others avoided her gaze. She noticed the whispered conversations halting as she drew near. Thorvald's shadow seemed to fall over everything, a constant reminder of the leader's unyielding presence. His scorn was a blade sharper than any axe. At the heart of the settlement, the great hall stood stout and imposing, its walls darkened by centuries of smoke and stories. The scent of burning pine and the faint tang of iron hung in the air. Though it was early, a few figures had already gathered, men preparing for the day's hunt, women exchanging news, children chasing one another along the muddy paths. Astrid's eyes scanned them all, searching. The men carried the weight of expectation. Their faces were etched with the hard lines of those who knew battle and loss. The women's eyes flickered with quiet strength, but beneath it lay a flicker of fear that none dared speak aloud. Her own heart beat with a growing storm inside her. These were her people, her tribe, yet they stood at the edge of an abyss they refused to see. She made her way toward the workshop of Gunnar Vidarson, the village's skilled carver, and one of the rare souls who still met her with kindness instead of skepticism. His small hut smelled of fresh wood shavings and pine resin, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and oil. Gunnar himself was bent over his workbench, hands steady despite the loss of a finger. His eyes, pale and kind, looked up as she entered. Astrid, he greeted quietly, setting aside a small carving of a raven. What brings you so early? She hesitated, pulling from beneath her cloak a roughly carved piece of oak. I need your skill, she said softly. A talisman. Gunnar's brow furrowed as he took the wood, turning it over in his hands. For protection, he asked, already guessing the answer. For Fenrir, she replied, her voice low but resolute. The great wolf. I want the amulet to carry him with me. The carver's eyes flashed with unease. A dangerous symbol to bear. Folk will whisper. A symbol of fear, yes, Astrid admitted, but also of strength. Sometimes, to keep darkness at bay, we must carry its shape close. Gunnar nodded slowly, setting to work with practiced hands. As the knife bit into the wood, Astrid watched the shavings fall like scattered memories between them. Outside, the settlement stirred to life with the cadence of the sea and the forest. The fishermen readied their nets, a chorus of voices carrying over the water. Children darted between the cabins, their laughter a fragile light against the encroaching shadows of winter. The scent of fresh bread baking in communal ovens mingled with the sharper tang of leather and wood smoke. Yet beneath this ordinary rhythm, an undercurrent of tension pulsed, a thread that Astrid could feel tight. Thorstein, the leader of the hunters, spoke next, his voice grim. It came before dawn, larger than any beast in these parts. We fought it off, but barely. Eirik took the worst. Astrid's breath hitched. This was no ordinary animal. It was the nightmare given form. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady despite the trembling inside. I warned you. Fenrir is coming. Thorvald, who had been watching from the shadows near the hall, pushed through the gathered crowd. His face was flushed, a storm of anger and disbelief burning in his eyes. You spread fear where there is none, he declared, voice echoing across the square. Your visions are the grief of a widow twisting your mind. Astrid met his gaze without flinching. This is no grief. It is a warning, one you refuse to heed. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some avoided her eyes, others whispered doubts. Helga, standing nearby, glanced at Astrid with a mixture of concern and skepticism, her fingers tightening around the wooden staff she carried. Thorvald's voice softened, but the threat remained. Focus on your duties, Astrid. Leave the gods to the vulva and the seers. We need leaders, not madwomen. But Astrid could not turn away from the truth gnawing at her soul. The wolf was real. Too real. The afternoon bled into evening, the sky bruising into dull purples and grays. Astrid returned to Gunnar's hut, where the carver had finished the amulet, a fierce wolf, its jaws parted in a silent snarl, etched with ancient runes meant to ward off evil. She held the carving to her chest, feeling the rough would press against her heart. It was a fragile shield, but it was all she had. As she prepared to leave, Frida Ketilsdottir, a young mother from the village, appeared at the door, clutching her small son close. Her eyes were wide with fear, her voice trembling. My husband was with the hunters, she said urgently. He saw the creature. Please, can you help us? Astrid nodded, stepping aside to welcome them in. Inside her cabin, the air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, dried sage and juniper smoke curling upward in thin ribbons. She placed the amulet above the doorframe, a silent ward against the darkness. Handing Frida a small leather pouch filled with protective herbs and a smooth runed stone, Astrid spoke softly. Place this beneath his pillow. It will keep Agnar safe tonight. The boy clung to his mother, eyes wide and searching. Astrid caught the fragile flicker of hope in Frida's gaze, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the ancient stories and warnings would hold power after all. When they left, the quiet returned. Astrid sat before the dying embers of the fire, eyes closed, visions already pulling her back to the shadowed mountains where Fenrir waited. She could feel the beast's hunger, its wrath, but beneath that, a purpose she did not yet understand. As twilight deepened, she wrapped the wolf amulet around her neck. The cool would warm against her skin. She knew the coming night would be long, and the danger real. But Astrid Thorsdottir was no stranger to darkness. For months, she had walked its edge alone. Now, the wolf was at her door, and she would face it, not with weapons, but with the strength of her own fierce heart. The evening shadows deepened over Ravnfjord, casting long fingers of darkness between the wooden cabins. The chill from the coming winter sharpened the air, seeping beneath worn furs and rattling loose shutters. Astrid stood silently at the doorway of her small cabin, watching the last fading light slip behind the jagged peaks that guarded the fjord. Inside, the small fire still glowed, its embers whispering faint warmth into the cold room. Her mind was restless. The wounds inflicted by the day's events pressed heavy on her chest. The disbelief in her warnings, Thorvald's scorn, the fearful silence that followed Eirik's arrival. She felt the weight of a community fracturing beneath old fears and stubborn pride. How could they not see? Fenrir was coming. The wolf was no mere nightmare conjured by grief or isolation. A soft knock broke the quiet, tentative but urgent. Astrid's breath caught as she opened the door to find Frida Ketilsdottir standing on the threshold, her young face pale and drawn, eyes wide like a frightened doe. Clutched tightly to her chest was Agnar, her small son, trembling beneath layers of coarse wool. "For the gods' sake, Astrid," Frida whispered, voice trembling. "Please, I had to come. The others won't listen, but I know what I saw. My husband was with the hunters. He said the wolf was not just a beast, it was something darker. He doesn't want to speak, not after what he saw." Astrid's gaze softened as she looked down at the child, whose wide eyes darted nervously between the two women. There was a desperate need there, a fragile hope wrapped inside fear that she recognized all too well. "Come inside," Astrid said, stepping aside quickly. The cold mud beneath their boots left dark smudges on the wooden floor as Frida entered, placing Agnar gently down near the fire. The cabin was small but warm, scented faintly with the smoke of juniper and dried herbs hung from rafters. The low crackle of the fire seemed to push back the encroaching night, but the tension in the room was palpable. Frida's hands trembled as she pulled a threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Some say you've lost your mind, Astrid," she admitted quietly. "But I can't shake the feeling that you're right. If the wolf comes, I don't know what we'll do." Astrid moved to her small table, taking from it a leather pouch filled with protective herbs, thyme, mugwort, and a pinch of salt. She reached up to hang the freshly carved Fenrir amulet above the door frame once more, its snarling wooden face casting flickering shadows on the wall. "This will help," she said, voice steady though her heart pounded beneath the calm surface. "Place this under Agnar's pillow. The runes and herbs will guard him against dark spirits and ill will." Frida nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she murmured. "I don't know what I'd do if something happened to him." Astrid's gaze lingered on the boy, who now sat quietly by the fire, clutching a small wooden figurine, a gift from his father before the hunters left that morning. The innocence of the child was a fragile thread holding together the fragile peace of the village. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken fears. Then Frida's voice broke the silence. "You're going out again tonight, aren't you?" Astrid looked toward the dim window, where the first stars began to prick the dark sky. "I have to," she said softly. "The wolf will not come without purpose. I need to understand why and what it wants." Frida hesitated, worry etching every line of her face. "You're alone in this. They think you mad. Thorvald will not stop you, but some men might." Astrid's eyes darkened, not with fear, but with stubborn resolve. "I have walked this path alone for moons. The wolf answers to no man's command but the gods. I will face it, not with sword or spear, but with whatever strength I carry within." Frida's breath trembled. "If you go, take Agnar with you." The suggestion startled Astrid. The child was barely more than a babe, and the wilderness beyond the village was no place for one so small. But beneath the hesitation, she sensed the desperation in Frida's words, the hope that a child might be spared what she could not. "No," Astrid said firmly. "The boy must be safe here, where others can protect him. My burden is mine alone." Frida nodded, tears finally spilling free. "May the gods watch over you, Astrid." As Frida left, clutching Agnar close once more, the door shut softly behind her. Astrid was left alone with the flickering fire and the heavy silence that filled the cabin. Her thoughts drifted, tracing back to the nights filled with visions. The wolf descending through the snow-draped mountains, its eyes glowing with a terrible hunger and a fierce purpose. It was not merely a beast of flesh and fur, but a specter of the past, a reminder of debts unpaid and rights undone. Her fingers brushed absently over the Fenrir amulet resting against her chest. It was a symbol of dread, yes, but also of unyielding strength. To carry the wolf was to carry the weight of the unknown, the dark truths hidden deep in the bones of their world. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the pines like a voice from another realm. The snow began to fall lightly, soft flakes drifting down to cloak the earth in silence. Astrid wrapped her cloak tighter, and prepared to step outside. The village seemed. She moved quietly, careful not to startle him, and set a small pot of water over the embers, coaxing the flames to grow with gentle breaths. The room, though small and humble, seemed to breathe warmth back to the two visitors as the fire took hold. The scent of burning juniper and dried sage lingered in the air, mingling with the faint, earthy smell of damp wool and pine from outside. Agnar's large brown eyes studied her from the firelight's edge, wide and wary. His lips trembled slightly, and he clutched a carved wooden figurine, a small bear, weathered around the edges, its smooth surface worn by many small fingers. Astrid noticed the fine scratches along its flank, the careful, almost reverent way the boy held it. It was a talisman of sorts, though humble. A gift from a father who might never return. In the quiet between them, words felt heavy, so Astrid sat down on a low stool beside the hearth, folding her hands in her lap. Her gaze met Agnar's, steady and unflinching, offering a silent invitation of safety. Slowly, the boy's tense shoulders eased, and a fragile trust began to weave itself between them. Frida sat near the doorway, her knuckles white as she clutched the edge of her cloak. Her eyes flickered nervously toward the window, watching the gathering dark beyond the small panes. She whispered a prayer under her breath, a soft chant in the old tongue, asking Freya for protection and mercy. The weight of a desperate mother pressed down on her, but in this moment, she allowed herself to lean on Astrid, a stranger perhaps, but the only hope in the gathering storm. Astrid reached out, her fingers brushing a loose strand of Agnar's tangled hair back from his forehead. The boy flinched, but did not pull away. Her touch was gentle, practiced in quiet kindness rather than command. She took a worn cloth from the table and dampened it in the hot water, then wiped persistently at the dirt smudging his pale cheeks. The skin beneath was flushed and cold, the faintest trace of a bruise blooming near his temple. "You're safe now," Astrid said softly, her voice a balm against the boy's silent fears. "The wolf cannot reach you here." Agnar blinked up at her, the flicker of fear mingling with a fragile hope. His lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he pressed the bear closer to his chest and shifted nearer to the fire. Astrid moved to the small wooden shelf, retrieving a bowl of thick porridge she had prepared earlier. The smell was simple, barley and honey, but it carried the comfort of home. She set the bowl before Agnar, who eyed it suspiciously at first, then tentatively took a spoonful. His small hands trembled as he lifted the food to his lips, the warmth spreading slowly through him, chasing away some of the cold, stubborn grip. Frida watched, her breath hitching as the tension in her son's shoulders visibly relaxed. The promise of warmth and sustenance was a fragile thread, but it was enough. "I am grateful," Frida said at last, her voice breaking the thick silence. "You have a gentle heart, Astrid. Many would not have opened their doors." Astrid's eyes flickered with a shadow of pain. "Gentle hearts are often the most needed," she replied, voice steady but soft. "Especially when darkness gathers." Frida nodded solemnly, then glanced toward the small bundle of herbs and stones resting on the table. "The others don't understand. They fear what they cannot see, and so they mock me, mock you." "They fear because they do not listen," Astrid said quietly. "Fear grows from silence and denial. But the wolf is patient. It waits for those who ignore the warnings." The fire crackled, and the room seemed to hold its breath in the space between their words. Agnar's gaze drifted toward Astrid's neck, where the carved wooden amulet of Fenrir hung on a leather thong. His fingers reached up hesitantly, brushing the smooth surface, feeling the faint ridges of the runes etched into the wood. "Is that Fenrir?" he whispered, his voice small. Astrid nodded. "Yes, the great wolf, the one who comes when the balance is broken." The boy's eyes darkened with a mix of fear and fascination. "My father told me stories, but he said Fenrir was a monster." Astrid's gaze softened, shadows playing across her pale face. He is a monster to some, but to others, he is a reminder. A reckoning. Agnar swallowed hard, his small hands tightening around the bear. I want to see my father again, he said quietly. But I don't want the wolf to take him. Astrid's throat tightened. The boy's simple truth struck deep, a child's desperate hope wrapped in fear and loss. Then we must make sure the gods remember him, she said gently. That the dead are honored, and their passage is guided. Only then will Fenrir's hunger be sated. Frida clasped her son's hand tightly, biting her lip to hold back tears. We will do whatever it takes. The firelight danced across their faces, casting flickering shadows that seemed to carry the whispers of ancient spirits. In the silence that followed, words felt fragile, easily broken by the weight of what lay ahead. Astrid rose slowly, moving to the small stack of furs beside the wall. She pulled one free and laid it carefully over Agnar's knees, tucking it gently around him like a shield against the cold night. Rest now, she said softly. The night is long, but you are not alone. The boy's eyelids fluttered, exhaustion pulling him towards sleep. In the quiet warmth, a fragile peace settled over the cabin, a brief reprieve from the storm gathering beyond the walls. Astrid lingered by the fire, watching the flames dance and sink, her thoughts churning beneath the calm surface. The weight of the wolf's coming pressed like an invisible hand against her chest. But here, in this small sanctuary, she found a moment's grace. The bond forming between herself, Frida, and Agnar was fragile, yet it carried the promise of something stronger, hope, and perhaps the beginning of trust. Outside, the wind howled faintly, weaving through the trees like a mournful song. The wolf's presence was near, its shadow stretching over the land like a dark tide. But inside the cabin, for a few stolen hours, the cold was held at bay by firelight, whispered prayers, and the unspoken vow to protect what remained. The news spread like wildfire through the mist-shrouded valleys beyond Ravnfjord, carried first on the breath of the wind, and then on the swift feet of riders and traders. Whispers spoke of something unnatural, a colossal beast stalking the ridges where eagles dared not nest. Tales twisted and grew with every telling. A giant wolf, a harbinger of doom, a monster that no man could face and live. The quiet settlement, once isolated and inward, found itself suddenly exposed to the eyes and ears of neighboring clans and far-flung wanderers alike. Astrid felt the weight of this growing attention as a cold hand clutching her heart. The villagers' initial disbelief had turned into anxious murmurs, but now, beyond the fjord's protective shadow, suspicion and fear fanned the flames into dangerous fires. Traders hesitated at the docks, their eyes flicking nervously toward the distant mountains. Hunters from nearby villages arrived in small groups, their faces lined with worry, their hands restless on the hilts of their knives. Even rival clans, known for their merciless raids and unyielding pride, sent scouts closer to Ravnfjord's borders under the guise of curiosity. The day dawned brittle and gray, the sky a tapestry of low, rolling clouds that threatened snow. Astrid stood at the edge of the village, watching as a small band of rough men approached over the frozen ground. Their leader, a tall figure cloaked in wolf pelts, carried a spear tipped with obsidian, his eyes sharp and calculating. The men moved with the silent precision of seasoned hunters, and the tension that gripped the village deepened. Thorvald met them at the great hall's threshold, his expression hard and unreadable. The leader of the visitors introduced himself as Sven, a chieftain from the neighboring settlement of Hrafnheim. His voice was cold but measured, his gaze lingering on Astrid with a mixture of suspicion and challenge. "We have heard your tales of a great wolf," Sven said, voice low and deliberate. "Stories that stir fear in our people. We come to see for ourselves what kind of threat you harbor." Thorvald stepped forward, chest swelling with the stubborn pride of a leader who refused to appear weak. "The beast is real," he admitted carefully, but it is not yet a threat to us. We manage our own. Astrid, Sven's men exchanged glances, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air like a blade poised to strike. It was clear that these guests did not share the village's nuanced understanding of the beast. To them, Fenrir was a monster to be hunted, a threat to be destroyed. Astrid's heart tightened. She knew the danger wasn't just in the beast's shadow, but in the fear it inspired among men. The wolf's coming was no accident. It was a reckoning, a mirror held up to their own failings. But would stubborn pride and suspicion drown out the wisdom she sought to share? Days passed, and the visitors set camp just beyond the village's edge, their fires flickering like watchful eyes in the gathering dusk. Conversations whispered through the night, plans, warnings, doubts. The atmosphere grew taut with the tension of an unseen storm. Within Ravnfjord, the division deepened. Some, like Frida and a handful of others, clung to Astrid's words, their faith a fragile but growing flame. Others, emboldened by the outsider's presence and Thorvald's unyielding stance, hardened their hearts against her warnings. Bjorn, Thorvald's brother, moved quietly between the factions, seeking to temper the rising discord. His limp slowed his steps, but not his purpose. When he found Astrid alone near the frozen mouth of the fjord, he spoke softly, his green eyes burdened with the weight of inevitable conflict. "You hold a heavy burden, Astrid," he said. "But the village is fracturing. The wolf's shadow grows longer, not just in the mountains but here, among our own." Astrid met his gaze, the flicker of moonlight catching in the depths of her eyes. "I know," she replied, "but fear blinds us. We must find the path before the wolf comes fully into the light." Bjorn sighed, the sound heavy with a man's regrets. "Thorvald will not yield. He sees the wolf as a threat to his power, not a message from the gods. I fear the coming days may demand more than words." Astrid nodded slowly, the cold wind tugging at the edges of her cloak. "Then we must be ready, not only for the wolf, but for what men might do in its name." The nights grew darker, the howls more frequent and closer now, enough to unsettle even the bravest. The villagers huddled around fires, their eyes darting to shadows that moved with unnatural grace. Mothers clutched their children tightly, whispering prayers to Odin and Freya, hoping the gods would shield them from what was to come. One evening, as the moon hung low and swollen in the sky, Astrid stood at the edge of the woods alongside Gunnar and Bjorn. The three looked out into the dark depths where the trees twisted like ancient sentinels, silent and watchful. Gunnar's hands trembled slightly as he held a lantern, the flickering flame casting uncertain light. "The wolf is waiting," Gunnar murmured, eyes flickering with unease. "I carved the amulet to protect, but even the strongest runes cannot shield from what is meant to be." Bjorn's gaze was steady, but his face betrayed the exhaustion of a man caught between duty and doubt. "We must seek the elders. There are ancient rites, forgotten in these times, that might calm the spirits and hold the wolf at bay." Astrid swallowed hard, the cold air tightening her throat. "And if the wolf is not a beast to be calmed? If it comes for justice, not destruction?" Gunnar looked to her, the lines of age and worry deepening on his face. "Then we face a reckoning. But it must be on terms set by the gods, not by men's fear." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation and tension. The village elders gathered in the great hall, their faces etched with worry and resolve. Helga, the wise woman, took center among them, her presence a beacon of ancient knowledge and quiet strength. She spoke of old customs, rites to honor the dead properly and appease restless spirits. Astrid stood among them, the Fenrir amulet heavy against her chest, her voice steady as she recounted her visions and the truth behind the wolf's coming. The hall was thick with the scent of burning herbs and whispered prayers. Thorvald remained a looming shadow, his pride and fear entwined in every word he spoke. "We cannot bow to superstition," he declared, voice ringing with finality. Our people need strength, not fear. Bjorn stepped forward, his voice a bridge between brother and widow. Strength also lies in humility, Thorvald. To deny the God's will is to invite ruin. The debate carried through the night, echoing the storm that raged outside, the wind lashing against the sturdy walls as if the very elements sought to tear them asunder. The village stood at a crossroads, caught between the past's old ways and the uncertain path ahead. In the quiet moments, when the fire's glow softened and the chatter faded, Astrid often found herself staring into the abyss of the night, listening for the wolf's call. Each howl was a pulse, a reminder that time was running thin. One morning, as frost glazed the edges of the fjord and the first snowflakes of winter began their silent descent, a messenger arrived from a distant clan, a sealed scroll bearing a warning. The wolf was not only a threat to Ravnfjord but a sign that the balance across the lands was shifting. Neighboring territories prepared for war, blaming the unrest on dark omens and broken oaths. The pressure mounted. Allies became uneasy, enemies emboldened. Astrid felt the walls closing in. Protecting her village meant facing not only the wolf but the storm gathering among men who would not listen until destruction touched their doorsteps. As the sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the frozen earth, Astrid stood once more at her cabin's doorstep. The Fenrir amulet hung heavy around her neck. Behind her, the village waited, fearful, fractured, uncertain. And beyond the edge of the world, in the dark forest where legends breathed and old gods whispered, the great wolf stirred, its eyes glowing with ancient sorrow and the promise of reckoning. The time had come to face not only the creature of myth, but the monsters born of human fear and pride. The wolf's howl was a call to awaken, and Ravnfjord would either answer or be swallowed by the gathering darkness. The night deepened over Ravnfjord, draping the village in a heavy cloak of shadow and snow. The wind moaned like a restless spirit weaving through the skeletal branches, and the cold pressed relentlessly against every shutter and door. Within the great hall, the tension was a living thing, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. The assembled crowd murmured uneasily, their faces pale and drawn from days of fear and sleepless hours. The firelight flickered uncertainly, casting long, twitching shadows across the rough-hewn beams. At the center of the hall stood Astrid Thorsdottir, her stance firm but weary. The Fenrir amulet hung heavily around her neck, its carved wooden face catching the firelight, eyes fierce yet filled with an unspoken sorrow. She spoke with steady conviction, voice rising above the restless whispers. "They come not to destroy for the sake of destruction," she said, "but to remind us of what we have forgotten. The dead without passage, the debts unpaid, the promises broken. Fenrir is the shadow of our own neglect." Her words struck a chord in some, stirring quiet nods and teary eyes. Yet others shifted uneasily, their doubts and fears tangled with pride and stubbornness. Thorvald Gunnarsson loomed at the hall's edge, his broad frame rigid as a carved pillar. His eyes, sharp and hard, burned with a growing fury. The scar across his cheek seemed to deepen in the flickering light, a silent testament to battles fought both outside and within. He stepped forward, his voice a low rumble, commanding the room's attention. "You speak of debts and broken promises as if they excuse weakness," Thorvald said, his tone edged with contempt. "I lead this clan, and I will not have it fractured by fear and superstition. The wolf is a beast. It can be slain. We will meet it with sword and shield, and we will survive." A ripple of agreement and dissent passed through the crowd. Some men clenched their fists, eager for battle, ready to prove their strength. Others, mothers clutching their children, elders with furrowed brows, looked on with silent dread. Bjorn Gunnarsson, Thorvald's brother, emerged from the shadows, his gait unsteady but determined. His green eyes searched the room, seeking to bridge the growing divide. He raised his voice, calm but carrying weight. Strength without wisdom is a blade that Helga Eriksdotter, the village's wise woman, stepped forward, her voice steady despite the wear of years. We must look to the old ways, offer the sacrifices, perform the rites that bind the spirits. Only then can we hope to turn Fenrir's wrath. Thorvald scoffed, shaking his head. Sacrifices? Rites? Superstition will not save us from steel and blood. A murmur of agreement rose around him. Yet the air hung heavy with uncertainty. Astrid raised her hand, cutting through the growing clamor. I will go to the forest. I will meet the wolf, not with sword, but with song and sacrifice. If the gods demand a price, I will pay it. Her declaration drew startled gasps. Many whispered warnings against such recklessness. Thorvald's glare burned into her like a spear. You would walk into the jaws of death alone? Foolish woman. I walk not alone, Astrid replied, voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I carry the prayers of the living and the dead alike. Bjorn nodded slowly, stepping beside her. Then I will go with you. If there is to be a reckoning, I will face it with you. Thorvald's eyes darkened, the clash of wills as fierce as any battle. You will bring ruin upon us all, he spat. Outside, the wind howled louder, a mournful lament weaving through the trees. The snow deepened, swallowing footprints and softening the world in white silence. As the clan prepared for what was to come, old fears and new hopes twisted together like knotted ropes. The villagers gathered weapons and warm furs. Prayers were whispered in trembling voices. The air thickened with anticipation and dread. Astrid stood at the edge of the village, the amulet of Fenrir heavy on her breast, the cold biting through her cloak but never through her resolve. Bjorn's steady presence was a quiet comfort beside her. Together, they stepped into the shadowed forest, their breath misting in the frigid air. The trees closed around them like ancient sentinels, silent witnesses to the unfolding fate. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the crunch of boots on snow and the distant call of night birds. The darkness pressed close, alive with the whispered secrets of old gods and restless spirits. Then, from the depths of the woods, a low growl rumbled, deep and resonant, echoing through the trees like the beating of a great heart. The earth seemed to shudder beneath its weight. Astrid tightened her grip on the amulet, steadying her breath. Between the shadows, two piercing yellow eyes emerged, glowing, intelligent, filled with an ancient sorrow. The great wolf stepped forward, a towering silhouette against the pale moonlight. Its fur was matted with ice, its breath steaming in the cold air. The eyes met Astrid's with a depth that spoke of things beyond mortal understanding. Pain, purpose, and an unyielding will. Bjorn raised his sword instinctively, but Astrid placed a hand on his arm. Wait. She stepped forward, voice soft, but carrying the weight of old song. A lament carried on the wind, weaving through the trees, a requiem for those lost and forgotten. The wolf lowered its massive head, nostrils flaring as it absorbed the ancient melody. The air around them seemed to hum with life and death entwined. Leaf, Astrid whispered, the name of fragile bridge across the chasm of years. The journey is not yet done. The wolf's eyes flickered, a spark of recognition shining in their depths. Slowly, it turned and disappeared into the night, its form melting into the shadows like smoke. Astrid fell to her knees, exhaustion and relief mingling in her chest. Bjorn knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. The wolf has accepted, he said softly. The debt will be paid. When they returned to the village, the dawn was breaking, a pale light spreading over the snow-draped mountains. The fires of Ravnfjord burned brighter, the air filled with the scent of smoke and hope. Thorvald awaited them at the great hall, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, silence held them all captive. Finally, the leader bowed his head, the weight of pride and fear lifting. You were right, Astrid. The The gods demand more than steel. They demand respect. The village gathered that day to honor the dead properly. Boats were prepared, small but sturdy, carrying the names and memories of those lost. With fire and song, they sent them on their final journey, the flames dancing like spirits freed into the endless sky. Astrid stood among her people, no longer a widow shunned, but a seer embraced. The amulet of Fenrir hung around her neck, no longer a symbol of fear, but of connection, a reminder that some truths must be faced, no matter how dark the path. And though the great wolf was never seen again, the howl sometimes carried on the northern winds, a soft, mournful call that spoke of honor, remembrance, and the fragile balance between the worlds of the living and the dead. Ravnfjord had faced the shadow and found light. In the heart of winter's chill, they had discovered the strength to confront the unknown, not with the fury of arms, but with the courage of understanding. Astrid's voice carried through the village in the days and years that followed, telling stories to the children gathered around the fire. The wolf is not just a beast, she told them, eyes shining with quiet wisdom. It is the echo of what we neglect and the warning of what must be made right. To face the wolf is to face ourselves. And so, beneath the endless sweep of the northern skies, the people of Ravnfjord lived on, forever aware that the true battle was not against monsters lurking in the dark, but against the silence and fear within their own hearts. The dawn broke slowly over Ravnfjord, soft light filtering through the heavy mist that clung to the frozen fjord. The cold had not loosened its grip, and the snow lay thick and unbroken, a white shroud covering the earth. Yet beneath the pale sky, a fragile warmth stirred, one born not of fire or sun, but of understanding and quiet redemption. Astrid Thorsdottir sat near the edge of the great hall, her shoulders still heavy with exhaustion, but her spirit unburdened for the first time in many moons. The Fenrir amulet hung against her chest, no longer merely a talisman of dread, but a symbol of the bridge she had forged between worlds. Around her, the people of Ravnfjord moved with a tentative calm, their expressions softened by the shared relief of surviving the storm that had threatened to tear their lives apart. Thorvald Gunnarsson entered the hall with measured steps. His usual arrogance had been tempered by the weight of what had transpired, by the undeniable truth that the wolf was not a monster to be slain by sword alone. The scar along his cheek caught the flickering firelight, a reminder of battles past, and the personal cost of his stubborn pride. He paused before Astrid, his glare softened but still guarded. "You were right," he said quietly, the words heavy with reluctant respect. "The gods speak in ways we do not always understand. I have been blind." Astrid looked up, her gray-blue eyes steady and calm. The bitterness that had once shadowed her gaze was replaced by a quiet strength. "We all are, at times," she replied gently. "But it is not too late to listen." Bjorn, Thorvald's brother, stepped forward, his limp barely noticeable in the charged moment. His green eyes reflected the hope that flickered anew in the room. Ravnfjord must remember this lesson, not just for our survival, but for the honor of those who came before us. The gathering crowd, once divided and fearful, now stood united in a shared understanding. Helga Eriksdottir, the village's wise woman, moved to the center, raising her voice in a solemn chant. The ancient words, barely remembered but deeply felt, wove through the hall like a healing balm. She spoke of rituals to honor the dead, of sacrifices not of blood but of remembrance, offerings to guide restless souls toward peace. Astrid's gaze drifted to the small wooden boats prepared at the shore, each adorned with personal tokens and carved runes. They were simple vessels, yet heavy with meaning, a passage for the lost warriors whose bodies never returned. Among them was a boat marked with a green cloak, a leather-bound tome, and a small, weathered sword, the possessions of Leif Haraldsson. Frida Ketilsdottir stood nearby, her hand resting protectively on her son Agnar's shoulder. The boy's wide eyes watched the preparations with a mixture of fear and wonder. The ghost of law. Helga raised her staff, calling the villagers to gather once more around the fire. "Tonight, we honor the dead and the living," she proclaimed. "We remember that our strength lies not only in arms, but in respect for the gods and for each other." As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow, the people of Ravnfjord knelt in silent prayer. Astrid's voice rose again, weaving the ancient songs that had once seemed lost to time. The amulet of Fenrir pressed warm against her heart, a quiet reminder of the journey she had endured, the journey from grief and isolation to acceptance and hope. Later, as the night deepened and the fires burned low, Astrid found herself alone near the water's edge. The fjord stretched out before her, vast and still, a mirror to the star-scattered sky. She felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by the fragile peace she had fought so hard to earn. Agnar's small hand slipped into hers, his grip steady and trusting. The boy's wide eyes searched hers, filled with the promise of a future no longer shadowed by fear. "Will the wolf come again?" he asked softly. Astrid smiled, a slow, gentle curve that reached her eyes. "Perhaps," she said, "but no longer as a threat. The wolf is a guardian now, a reminder that we must honor what we have lost, so it does not haunt us." They stood together in the quiet, the cold air filled with the faint echo of distant howls, no longer cries of terror, but of remembrance and hope. In the days that followed, Ravnfjord healed. The scars left by fear and loss remained, but so did the bonds forged in the fire of shared trial. Thorvald ruled with a tempered hand, his pride reshaped by humility. Bjorn served as a bridge between the old ways and the new, guiding the clan with wisdom born of pain and understanding. Gunnar returned to his workshop, carving new amulets not only of Fenrir, but of other runes, symbols of protection, strength, and peace. His hands, steady and sure, brought comfort to many who had once turned away from Astrid's warnings. Helga's voice grew stronger, her ancient knowledge embraced anew. She taught the village to listen, to the signs of nature, the whispers of the gods, and the songs of the dead. Frida and Agnar found a place of safety and belonging within the community, their fears eased by the newfound respect for the unseen forces that shaped their lives. And Astrid, no longer the widow shunned by grief, but the seer honored for her courage, continued her quiet vigil. She carried the amulet of Fenrir not as a shield against fear, but as a symbol of the bond between worlds. Her visions, once a source of torment, became a guide for the days ahead. Under the endless sweep of northern skies, the people of Ravnfjord lived on, watchful, humbled, and united. They had faced the darkness, not with blade alone, but with the strength to see beyond it. The wolf's howl still echoed through the mountains on cold nights, a mournful song carried by the wind. But now it spoke not of destruction, but of remembrance, a reminder etched in the hearts of all who listened that honor, courage, and understanding were the true shields against the shadows. And in that truth, Astrid found her peace. The first light of dawn seeped gently through the frost-laced windows of the great hall, painting the worn wooden planks with a pale, silvery glow. Outside, the snow still lay thick and undisturbed, a quiet blanket over the land that had recently trembled beneath the weight of fear and ancient reckoning. Within the walls of Ravnfjord, a new day was dawning in more than just the turning of the sun. It was a day born from the ashes of loss, the remnants of doubt, and the fragile seeds of hope planted by one woman's unwavering courage. Astrid sat quietly near the long wooden table, her hands folded in her lap, the carved amulet of Fenrir resting softly against her chest. The presence of the wolf, once a harbinger of terror and destruction, now lingered in her mind as a symbol of connection between worlds, between the living and the dead, between past mistakes and future promises. Her stormy gray-blue eyes traced the faces of the villagers who had come together after months of division and unrest. There was a new light in their eyes, a tempered strength that had survived the darkest nights and the loudest doubts. Thorvald Gunnarsson, the once stubborn and proud leader of the clan, stood across the room speaking in low, measured tones with Bjorn. The harsh lines of his face had softened, and the heavy weight of regret no longer bore down on his shoulders quite so heavily. His scarred cheek gleamed faintly in the morning light, a permanent mark of battles fought and lessons learned. The pride that had once blinded him was tempered now by the humility born of loss and understanding. He had publicly acknowledged Astrid's vision and the truth of the wolf's coming, and in doing so, had begun the slow work of mending a fractured community. Bjorn's limp was less noticeable now as he moved deliberately through the hall, speaking quietly with elders and warriors alike. His green eyes carried the burden of being the bridge between the old ways and the new, between stubborn tradition and the necessary change that the community could no longer deny. He had stood beside Astrid in that cold, shadowed forest when the great wolf appeared, and now he stood beside her still, no longer only as a mediator, but as a partner in the fragile rebuilding of trust. The villagers gathered in small clusters, their conversations hushed and tentative, as if still learning the language of peace after months of fear and suspicion. Mothers clutched children close, elders exchanged quiet blessings, and young warriors spoke of the future with cautious optimism. The air that once held the sharp tang of tension and dread now shimmered with a fragile sense of unity. Near the hearth, Helga Eriksdotter moved with the grace of a woman well accustomed to carrying the weight of many generations. Her voice, though softened by age, still carried the power of ancient wisdom as she led simple chants and prayers meant to soothe restless spirits and honor those long gone. Her white hair, pulled back tightly with faded ribbons, caught the firelight as she spoke of rites to bind the living and the dead in harmony. She had watched the village's struggle with acceptance and the slow unraveling of old fears. Now, she saw a new path opening, one that embraced the old stories with renewed respect and understanding. Frida Ketilsdotter, her young son Agnar safe and sound, moved quietly through the hall, offering gentle smiles and soft words to those still shaken by recent events. Her gratitude toward Astrid was unspoken but deeply felt, a bond forged not just by shared fear, but by the fragile hope that had begun to grow in the hearts of many. Agnar, clutching a small carved bear gifted by his father before the hunters left, followed at his mother's heels. His wide brown eyes reflected a future no longer marred by shadows but brightened by the promise of healing. Astrid rose slowly to her feet, the weight of the room's gaze settling upon her. For months, she had borne the brunt of disbelief and scorn, the isolation of grief made heavier by the refusal of others to see what she saw. Now, as she moved among her people, she felt less alone. Her courage had become a beacon, a quiet light guiding the village from darkness toward understanding. She made her way to the long wooden table where the elders had assembled tokens and offerings for the coming ceremony. Small wooden boats, crafted by Gunnar and others, stood ready, each adorned with symbols and keepsakes to honor those lost to the unforgiving East. These vessels, fragile against the vastness of the fjord, carried the memories and prayers of the living, sent out into the cold waters as passage for souls long denied their final rest. Gunnar Vidarsson was already at work, his strong, weathered hands steady as he carved intricate runes into the hull of another boat. His silver hair caught the firelight, and his pale blue eyes shone with a quiet pride. Despite the toll of years and hard labor, there was a newfound lightness to his movements, a sense of purpose renewed. He had once doubted Astrid's visions, but now he understood the strength that came from embracing the unknown rather than fearing it. "Is it ready?" Astrid asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of the long night that had passed and the hope that now filled the dawn. Gunnar nodded, setting down his carving tools. It is. Astrid turned to him, her face pale but resolute. The wolf was never a beast to be slain, she replied. It was a keeper of balance, a reminder that the past cannot be ignored, and the dead must be honored. Thorvald stepped forward then, his voice low but sincere. The pride that once ruled him had been tempered by the truth he could no longer deny. I was blind, he said, eyes meeting hers. Your courage saved us all. The murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Old wounds, once raw and festering, began to close beneath the balm of shared understanding. In the days that followed, the village of Ravnfjord found a new rhythm. The bonds between neighbors, strained by fear and suspicion, began to strengthen once more. The old ways were not forgotten but renewed. The Volva's songs, the healer's herbs, the carver's runes, all woven into the fabric of daily life with a deeper respect for the unseen forces shaping their world. Astrid's role within the community transformed as well. No longer a widow shunned or dismissed as a madwoman, she became a respected seer, a keeper of knowledge and guardian of the balance between worlds. Her visions, once a source of torment, now guided decisions and inspired reverence. She continued to wear the Fenrir amulet, not as a shield against fear, but as a symbol of the bonds she had forged between the living and the dead, between past and future, between strength and humility. The amulet carried the memory of the wolf's howl, no longer a cry of terror, but a call to remembrance and respect. One evening, as the northern lights shimmered faintly in the darkening sky, Astrid stood outside her cabin, the cold air crisp against her skin. Agnar approached quietly, his small hand slipping into hers. The boy's eyes, once wide with fear, now held a quiet confidence. "Will the wolf come again?" he asked softly, his breath misting in the chilly air. Astrid smiled, a slow, gentle curve that carried the warmth of long-sought peace. "Perhaps," she said, "but no longer as a threat. The wolf is a guardian now, a reminder that we must honor what we have lost, so it does not haunt us." Together, they looked toward the distant mountains, where shadows stretched long beneath the stars. The faint echo of a wolf's howl drifted on the wind, a sound no longer feared, but embraced as a song of remembrance and hope. And so, beneath the endless sweep of the northern skies, the people of Ravnfjord lived on, forever watchful, forever changed. They had faced the darkness and found light, not in the fury of arms, but in the courage to see beyond fear and embrace the truths that bind all hearts. The wolf's howl remained a silent promise etched in the bones of the land, a legacy of honor, courage, and understanding passed down through generations. And in that legacy, Astrid found her peace at last. The fires along the fjord's edge had long since burned low, the last embers fading into the cold night air. Astrid stood a little apart from the others, her gaze fixed on the dark waters reflecting the pale glow of stars. The small wooden boats, now empty of their flickering flames, had drifted silently beyond sight. In the stillness, the weight of what had transpired settled deep within her bones, both a burden and a balm. Around her, the village of Ravnfjord moved quietly, wrapped in a fragile peace. The divisions of the past moons seemed to have softened, replaced by a shared understanding born from trial and grace. Faces once shadowed with suspicion now carried the faint light of hope, and even Thorvald's usual sternness had softened into a tempered humility. Astrid's hand brushed the Fenrir amulet resting against her chest. It was no longer a symbol of dread or isolation. Now, it was a thread connecting her to something larger than herself. To the wolf, to the gods, to the restless souls that had long wandered without rest. It was a reminder of the truth she had fought so hard to speak, that some monsters do not come to tear down, but to awaken. Beside her, Bjorn's steady presence was a quiet comfort. His green eyes, still tinged with the pain of many battles, held a rare softness as they met hers. He spoke without looking away from the stars, voice low and thoughtful. "The wolf's howl still echoes," he said, "but it is no longer a cry of fear. It is a song, a call to remember, to honor, to live with eyes open." Astrid nodded, the cold seeping through her cloak no match for the fire kindled deep inside her heart. "We have learned that the past cannot be buried beneath silence. It must be faced, understood, and held with care." The boy, Agnar, approached cautiously, clutching the carved bear gifted by his father. His small hand slipped into Astrid's, warm against her cold fingers. His wide eyes searched hers, seeking reassurance beyond words. "Will the wolf come back?" he asked softly, his breath forming little clouds in the frosty air. Astrid smiled gently, a curve of quiet strength and hope. "Perhaps," she said, "but not as a threat. The wolf is a guardian now, a reminder that we must honor what we have lost, so it does not haunt us." The night sky stretched vast and endless above them, the northern lights beginning to swirl faintly in colors too delicate to name. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of snow and ancient pines. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a distant howl rose, not sharp or terrifying, but mournful and filled with a strange grace. It was a song of remembrance. Astrid's thoughts drifted to Leif, and to all those lost warriors whose final journey had been denied, to the souls who had wandered, restless, needing a passage home. She felt their presence not as a weight, but as a blessing, a bridge between worlds forged by courage and acceptance. The village was quiet now, the fires subdued, the people finally at rest. The storm of fear and denial had passed, leaving behind a fragile but unbreakable bond. The promise that the living would honor the dead, that the old ways would not be forgotten, and that the courage to face the unknown would be remembered. She looked once more toward the fjord, the place where the boats had sailed into the night. The water was still, save for the gentle ripple of waves kissing the shore. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one where fear no longer ruled, nor did silence. The wolf's howl had come not to destroy, but to awaken. And in that awakening, the people of Ravnfjord found their true strength. As Astrid turned to walk back toward the village, the snow began to fall softly again, blanketing the world in quiet white. Each flake seemed to carry a promise of renewal, of memory, of peace. Years from now, the stories would be told around fires like this one. The tale of the widow who dared to see beyond grief, who faced the shadow with open eyes and an open heart. A story of loss transformed into wisdom, fear into understanding. And beneath the endless northern sky, the wolf's howl would remain, a gentle reminder that the deepest darkness can birth the brightest light. If these tales found a place in your heart, if you feel drawn to the echoes of a world where honor and courage are forged in the silence between the stars, then stay with us. More stories await, carved from the frost and fire of Viking lands. Because sometimes, the fiercest battles are not fought with sword or shield, but with the courage to listen and to believe. Join us again, and let the stories carry you through the long night. For in the end, it is not the wolf we must fear, but the silence we keep within.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.